A very special welcome as well to a friend of mine sitting way at the back there, Dominic. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. God bless you. Thank you to the Assembly for your prayers over the mission trip. Let me just take a brief moment to share with you on the Jamaica trip. And this morning I am happy to say that sharing with me is Bruce. And I've invited Bruce just to come alongside and let's work together as we open the Word together. We want to do that a little more with some of the younger guys in the assembly. As I said, thank you very much for your prayers. The medical mission trip went very well. And we had one day of rest, which was a holiday, actually, but not so much a day of rest. It's rest and work. But all in all, it was very successful. We didn't have the large number of clinicians or patients as we would normally have, like 500-600 people for over the 10 days period. But what was special about this trip is that, and God worked it out this way. As you would recall, Jamaica had a very bad experience. I think it may have been the worst hurricane they have ever had, and really devastated a lot of the areas. And when I was planning this, we had originally supposed to have been in Zimbabwe, but the Lord worked it out, and I felt that Jamaica has just gone through a rough period, and it would be good to come alongside and be of some help. And I'm glad it worked out that way. Because we learned something that we have never implemented or did in 40 years of doing medical missions. And that is, because of what transpired within our clinics, we had a form that we used, which we didn't want to make it known to people because they would have withdrawn. It was basically a form of just a few questions, which would help us to understand where people were mentally, how they were affected psychologically by what they experienced. And that was very, very successful. So as they came in and they registered and went through the process of being triaged, that is taking their blood, taking their pressure, and filling out their little forms, we had about 5 questions that we asked them. And those 5 questions helped us to understand how they were impacted by the hurricane. I'll give you one example. It's one thing to sit in your house during that hurricane and you look through your window or your door, wherever there was an opening, and see somebody's roof flying in the air. It's another thing for you to stand in your house and see your roof going. That impact was devastating to a lot of people. Some of them, members of their family, were hurt. Some of them have really gone through a traumatic experience. And so what happened with the less people that we had in the clinic, it gave us the opportunity to be able to pray with them. Because that little form that we filled out with about 5 questions was attached to their document pertaining to their health condition. So as it came to us and to myself and to the doctors, we knew exactly what kind of a psychological effect the hurricane had on people. And so that was very, very successful. People responded very calmly, and they left the clinics very peaceful, very happy, very thankful. So continue to pray for them. The other good thing I must say, and that is the people, the Jamaicans, really worked hard. The areas that we drove through, which was not all of them, just a few of them, and they described to us the extent of the damage that the hurricane did. You couldn't see anything. You could not believe what they were saying, because they got together, they cleaned up, and they are rebuilding on their own. And God bless them. Continue to pray for them. Sad to say, and I'm going to say it publicly, the government really is not helping the people. Really not helping the people. We shipped in 13 containers of goods in December. You know where they are? Sitting on the wharf. These are things that the people needed. I had a friend, I'm not going to mention his name for security reasons, who came and visited us on Saturday and said, and I think this was mentioned, and I'm not saying this for gossip, please. I'm saying this for you who are people of God to pray. Pray for the country. Pray especially for the leaders. 2% of the billions of dollars the Jamaica government has received have been given to the people. 2%. And that is public information, by the way. Jamaica is not worse than anywhere else. So don't look down upon them. I'm saying all of that simply to say that we need to pray for our leaders. And corruption. Don't think we don't have corruption in Canada. Yesterday, I was at one of our food distribution. And I wouldn't tell you some of the experiences some of the people are going through. Do you know 1 of 3 people in Canada right now are begging for food? 1 out of 3 people. 50% and more of the food that we produce in Canada go to the dump. If you come here on the second Saturday of every month, and you see the food that comes in here that is distributed among the other assemblies, all that was going to the dump. That is just a trickle. And God is going to not necessarily judge, but we're going to suffer the consequences of our behavior in this country. We may not like it, but everything has its consequence. So we got to pray. We got to pray. Just another note. Pray for the assemblies in Jamaica. They're working hard. They're trying to, just like Canada and elsewhere, since COVID, people are not going back to church. Yeah. They're comfortable in their homes. And they are suffering the same thing back in Jamaica. We have got representation from Midland Bible Institute. Not a strange name to me. Mate has shipped books to Midland in the 90s, a lot of books. So pray for them. Pray for them. Pray for ourselves. I want to take just 30 seconds to remind you. It was mentioned this morning. Pray for, as David mentioned, pray for Toronto. You know what I would say? Pray for yourself. Pray for yourself before you start praying for Toronto. What is God doing in your life? Last time I spoke, you remember what I spoke on? Anybody remember? In the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. Isaiah had to come to that place where he had to see himself first before he saw the problems in the other people's lives. I am a man of unclean lips. I dwelt in the midst of a people of unclean lips. He went through not only conviction, he went through cleansing. And then he was commissioned. So maybe we need to go through that process of conviction Why is it that I am not doing what I'm supposed to do? And then be cleansed before I can go out and tell people about God. So thank you very much for listening, and pray for us as we continue to serve God. God is doing a work. And if he's not doing it among us, we need to pause and ask ourselves the question, Lord, is it me? Why is it? Is it me? That's where it starts. So God bless you. At this time, I'd like to invite Bruce. Bruce will come and share with us what God has laid on his heart, and then I'll pick it up from there. Over to you, Bruce.
Thank you. We'll just talk a little bit about God's timing. So our message for today, it's going to be about God's timing from King Solomon. So we'll talk about God's timing and what that entails. So in his time, God's timing can be everything. Okay. So if you think about God's timing can be everything. So we'll kind of open our chapter. We'll go to Ecclesiastes. So we'll go to chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes. I know we've heard Arnie talk a little bit about Isaiah. So we're going to just turn our Bibles to that chapter here. Our topic for today, or our message for today, is going to be on God's timing, or in his time. We'll just pick up from there. So in his time, God can do everything, okay? Does anybody know what time means? What is time to everyone they can think of? What does time mean? So time, it can mean a lot of things, right? So if you think about the creation of the world, right, in a darkness and void, there could be no time, right? Time does not exist. Time can be something that's created from void, from darkness, okay, or from a substance that is nothing, okay. And this can be very true of Solomon's life or his story, right? In his time, in his reign, he had a lot of challenges. So you can see that he was kind of lost in sin, and also in his time, he was very challenged, right? He was kind of trying to understand his wisdom. He was seeking after God. So he was looking at, particularly looking at ways to influence the Queen of Sheba, and also finding some profit under the sun. So he's trying to figure out how can he make an impact in his kingdom, right? So he's looking at examples of how the sun or the vanity of people, right? So he's looking at overarching aspects of how everything is vain, and there is vanity and there's pleasure. That's after that it's been seeking, right? So in that aspect, he's looking at some prophets, right? So for example, falling into sin. So he's looking at some comparisons of how sin is present and how we should be wise, and how we should go about dealing with that, right? So not falling into sin, right? So he's giving us some examples. For example, building houses, and also planting many vineyards as well, right? And he took a chapter in chapter 3 talking about his timing, or in his time. So this whole chapter, it gives different examples of timing, right? So looking at silver and gold, special treasures, and we can see how he's able to kind of talk about a time, for example, right? So, for example, God's timing is excellent and sure, right? So his timing is always perfect, right? So a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, right? A time to pluck what is planted, right? So that is a very good example of that, and a time to kill or a time to destroy, a time to rejoice, right? So these are some clear examples of that as well. And also talking a little bit about his wisdom, right? So looking at God's wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight, right? But to a sinner, he gives work of gathering. So in a sinner, he's more downcast, or look down and in sight. For there's a man whose labor is wisdom, right? So looking at his timing, how it's perfect and it's sure, and it's not vanity, right? God's timing is it's not vanity. It's something that is produced out of harvest, or in time, or in season. And then looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 21, for example, looking at the example of how there's a man whose labor is wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must leave his heritage to a man. So it's talking about marriage, but labor and skill, and talking a little bit about vanity and a great evil, right? So in his kingdom, there was a lot of great evil. We see in King Uzziah how things have changed, right? The kingdom has fallen. So you can see this impact that Solomon is trying to figure out for David, and Solomon's trying to figure out what to do next, right? So he's trying to see how God can actually use him in a mighty way for that too as well, right? And we can also think about that as well, and then going into our points as well, or going to our blessings, right? So there's also a surety that's there. God's blessing is no doubt, right? Solomon was greatly blessed with a lot of riches, lots of lots of things as well, and that's also guaranteed for us as well in some ways. But also God gives wisdom and glory, and His glory and holiness is powerful, right? So we can see in the life of Solomon, he was greatly blessed, right? And it's also his constant his wisdom, right? And a man, and that's an example there as well. And then also seeing the vanity and the affliction that he faced, right? Though it has not been, and has not been there as well. And then also looking at our timing as well, right? How it's excellent, and also how it's sure as well, as well. And then talking a little bit about our background. So that's pretty much our background. That's our story of the idea of how this kingdom came about, and then also looking at how our life. Looking at some examples of how how we're able to kind of work around that chapter as well. Okay, and the writer of this book is Solomon, and he's the writer of the chapter, and he often entails talking a little bit about meaninglessness, sometimes often sin, a little bit about external pleasures as well. So looking at his life and how he felt, and looking at the amount of how he felt, you can see the impact that his time was very important, right? His reign was very important, and also looking at how that is as well, right? So often he was kind of unsatisfied and he was trying to figure out some ways to get satisfaction, but unsatisfied, and looking at the fact that there's no profit under the sun as well, right? So those are all some overarching factors as well, and looking at that, and then lastly looking at this chapter that of Ecclesiastes. If you go to or to turn to actually, let's just turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 2. So let's just head over there. So we'll give you a more clear examples. So two. So more clear examples. So we can see that he was talking a little bit about those aspects of God's timing, right? So we could see how in chapter 3, sorry. So in chapter 3, for example, there's a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, right? A time to pluck what is planted or what is needed, right? So you can see in God's timing, we really, an overarching thing, we really don't know how the world was created, right? Only God knows exactly how the world was created, and God was able to design or plan out those creations and let it unfold, right? So in this topic that we're going to talk about, in this time, there's always a time for outcomes, right? Or a time for to kill, or time to harvest, right? And God can only bring that out through His fruitfulness and through your faithfulness, right? So you can see how God has given that task to Solomon, right? And Solomon understood that. So he was able to understand, okay, now is the time to do this, right? Or now is the time not to do this, right? So you understood that overarching method, and being the king in Jerusalem, he was kind of waiting on that as well, right? So he understood that as well, and then looking at the vanity of life. So he was able to understand that based on God's timing, right? So what God has revealed to him, he was able to understand vanity. He was able to understand what that means, right? So he was able to understand vanity, and he was able to understand the profit that man offers, right? Whereas God offers. God doesn't offer vain pursuits. God doesn't offer vain labor, right? Your handiwork, or your it's valuable to you. Your labor is not in vain. So whatever you labor, that will be an outcome that is given to you, right? So for example, in verse 10 of chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes, we look at the fact that see that this is new, right? There's a new coming that is there, right? Is there anything said to be, is there anything of which is maybe said that this is new, right? So that God has created this new thing for them, a new harvest, a new season, right? Or a new outcome. For example, in a season of sin, or in a season of an outcome, God will create some output or some ways to basically let you find blessings, or let you grow, or let you plant more seeds to harvest. So for example, in John, we talk about the true vine, right? The vine that can come out and give forth fruit. So there's a really good picture of that example, that comparison, and kind of bring those ideas out as well, right? So and then looking at chapter 2 and chapter 3, talking a little bit more about those same topics, right? Not to gratify the flesh. with wine, or right, guiding your heart with wisdom, right? And then also making sure that you stay away from sin as much as you can. And then we can see the ending of the chapter, looking at the overall arching, talking a little bit more about practical wisdom, right? And talking about fearing God, right? Keeping your vows, making sure that you're not rash with your mouth. So these are some practical wisdom that Solomon was able to place down, and was able to place down, and then also talking about the labor of the mouth as well, right? So, for example, in a job interview, your words or your mouth can give you a lot of labor, can give you a lot of wisdom, right? So give you understanding of what to do, and also give you plentiful blessings as well, right? So these are a good example of that. Or if you go golfing, if you go golfing, for example, that could be a period of time where you can kind of create more labor, right? Maybe if you want to be an athlete, or if you want to do something practical with that, use it for the glory of God, that can be as well an example of avoiding that vanity that you can there, where it's an empty pursuit, for example. Okay, and then also finishing off with the whole chapter, and you can see how Solomon was able to kind of come to a conclusion, how that everything is vain, right? Fear God and keep all of His commandments, right? Very important words here, very powerful, and this is the kind of the overarching theme that we're able to come together, and that all is vanity, right? And we can see how he was able to kind of come to that picture at the end as well. And then you can see also how Solomon is able to kind of see that there is pleasure out there in the sun, but it's not valuable, it's not there. That is what's kind of those overalling points as well. So this kind of is my intro. We're just gonna head over to pass back over to Arnie, and then he's gonna just finish the message overall.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Very interesting topic, a topic that we all have a problem with, and that is time. And I encourage you, go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and especially from verse 2 to verse 8, I think it is, and read about it. There's a time for everything, every single thing. We are living in a time when we try to force time. You understand what I mean by that? I don't think you would. I'll give you an example. There's a time to plant, and there's a time to reap. But we want to reap before reaping time. So what do? Science have come up with what they call fertilizer. Okay? We have chicks, we raise the chicks, and roughly about 8 weeks, you have a healthy chick. Well, a healthy fowl is no longer a chick, but it's a healthy fowl, a healthy bird. Now, we give them hormones, and after 4 weeks, they're in Swiss Chalet or McDonald's. What's the consequence of that? Our health. Our health. You don't force time with God. We all, including myself, have got to learn to wait on God. God has created everything perfectly with its perfect timing. You put a seed in the ground, there's nobody that exercises faith and patience like a farmer. He plants, he waits. There is no way he can germinate that seed. He waits. It grows. From the time it shoots up, he knows what to do. I'm talking about a proper farmer, not the modern day farmer. He grows his crop for 7 years, and after that, what he does? He rests it for a year. We don't do that anymore. There's nothing called resting the soil. So we put in things like hydrated lime, stabilizing the soil, and put in fertilizer to boost the crop and cause it to grow. We suffer as a result. When God sets a pattern, walk according to it. Don't try to force it. Don't try to tell God that you know better than He does. So there is a time for everything. It's written in the Word of God. How often have you and I said, I wished I had, what is it? What are the next words? More time. More time. We run into that problems because we cannot manage the time that we have. We bring other things into that time that we have. And so we spread ourselves how? Thin. We cannot accomplish and achieve what we would be set out to accomplish and achieve in the time that we have. That's a problem with all of us, including myself. I've said that many times. I wish I had another 4 hours or 6 hours in the day. Why? Because I find myself doing so many things or trying to do so many things within that allotted time. There is a time for everything. God controls time. And what I want to do this morning is to pick up from what Bruce has shared and bring it down to our level, where we need to focus on what should be focused on: God's timing. And we all have a problem with that, because our basic problem is that we can't wait on God. God is taking too long. In Ecclesiastes Chapter 3, verse 1, we are told, to everything there is a season and a time, to every purpose under heaven. Do you know that under heaven, everything has a purpose? Every single thing, whether it's the moon, whether it's the stars, whether it's the sun, whether it's the ocean, whether it's plant life or human life, there is a purpose. And there is a purpose in God's timing. One of the hardest things for believers is waiting on God. It's the hardest thing for all of us. We struggle when it comes to waiting on God. We often ask ourselves, Lord, why is this taking so long? Why hasn't my prayers been answered? I've been praying about this matter for so long. Yes, no answer seems to be coming. We have why, and sometimes why now? God does something, and he does something before we expected it. We are not prepared for it, and we say, why now? We have a problem. It's either too early or it's too long. Why was this door closed? Why now? The Bible teaches us that God is never early, he is never late, and he is never wrong. Never early, never late, and never wrong. His timing is perfect. His timing is purposeful, and his timing is powerful. What feels like delay to us is very often divine preparation. God's timing is different from ours. You go into 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8. One day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. You go back into Old Testament in chapter 55 of Isaiah, verses 8 and 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, says the Lord. Habakkuk puts it this way in chapter 2 and verse 3, when he says, and I love this, though it tarries, wait for it. It will surely come. I love that verse. Though it tarries, though it is taking so long, wait for it. Wait for it. It will come. You were to look at Abraham and Sarah. Good examples. Abraham was promised that he was going to have a son. He's going to have descendants like the stars of the heavens. He couldn't see it coming. How could that be possible when I don't even have one son? One son. Time. And Sarai at the time, God is taking too long. I got to help out. And she tried to help God. Abraham, here is my maid. Take her. Lie with her. Let her give me a seed. We are suffering for it up to today. And we will continue to suffer for it until the end of time. I heard this once. Don't try to stir God pot. Leave it in. Or don't put your hand in God pot. Leave it to him. And we have the story about Abraham and Sarah. Genesis chapter 12, God called him. Genesis chapter 15, God gave him a promise pertaining to his descendants. In Genesis 21, Sarah conceived, bore Abraham a son in his old age, and at the set time of which God has spoken to him. God had told him, 1 year from today, you're going to have a son. God waited until Abraham was old. He waited until it was impossible for Sarah to have a child. Why did God do that? God did that so that it was not humanly possible. Do you realize that God has been doing that for years? Didn't he do that with Gideon? Caused the army to dwindle down to just a few men. Why? So that man would realize, and they would realize it wasn't done by their military strength, but by the power of God. By the power of God. And we need to come to that place where we need to understand and realize when we have a relationship with God, let God be in control. Let him hold the reins of our lives. I would like to share something with you, but I'm going to leave that for some other time. Learning to wait on God. Learning to wait on God. And the little time that you have in waiting on God, make good use of it. Start investing with God. And I'm not thinking about just taking money out of your pocket and giving it to missions or giving it to the church or giving it to our poor people. No. I'm talking of start investing your life with God. And do you think you're really investing your life with God? I use that statement simply to remind us all, our lives are not our own. We are bought with a price. We belong to God. The price that was paid is something mysterious to us. We cannot understand, we cannot comprehend the truth of that price. Let me give one to you, which is the most important one. He who knew no sin was made to be sin for us, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. In him. One of the mysteries we cannot begin to understand. How can perfection take on imperfection? So that imperfection can become perfection. One of the mysteries of God. But the beautiful thing about it is that when we embrace that truth, although we cannot fully understand it, we begin to experience it. Embracing meaning when we realized who Jesus is, what he did for mankind, and we can embrace that and say to God, thank you, because you paid a debt that you did not owe. For us, the people who had a debt that we could not pay. That's grace. That's grace. When we can come to grips and embrace that, we would learn to realize, like the Apostle Paul, I am dead. I am dead. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ who lives within me. And the life which I now live, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. I'm saying all of that to remind us we are not our own. We belong to God. That's why the Apostle Paul, referring to himself and his companions, said, we are bond slaves of Christ. A bond slave was a man who, when he has served his time and it came to the point of him being freed, he turns to his master and says, no, I don't want to leave you, master. I love you. I want to stay with you the rest of my life. He was a slave. At this point, the master takes him, puts his ear to a doorpost or to a tree, and he pierces that ear. A mark that he is no longer his own. He is lock, stock, and barrel, his master's property. He has no rights, nothing whatsoever. And Paul is saying, that's who I am to my Lord. I am a bond slave to him. I have given my life to serve him. Why? Because of what he has done for me. A good master would have had to treat his servant with love, with compassion, with patience, with grace, for that servant to turn to him and say, Master, I want to stay with you the rest of my life. But you can never do that until you have come to the place in your life where you realize and recognize the love of God, the grace of God, the patience of God, the mercy of God, and the list goes on and on. Joseph, another interesting character in the Bible. And I call that timing through trials. You know the story of Joseph, a young man who had a dream, told his brothers the dream. And his brothers were angry with him because of that dream. He told his father about the dream. And his father said to him, "Do you mean that I and your brothers are going to bow before you?" Poor little Joseph didn't understand the dream. He couldn't answer that question. They hated him as a dreamer, his brothers, that is. And you know the story well. When his father sent him out to go and see what his brothers were doing, they saw him. They said, "Here comes the dreamer." They got him, beat him up, throw him in a pit. Killed an animal, put blood on his coat, took the coat back to the father, and said, "We found this coat of many colors with blood." Poor Jacob felt that, well, he was killed. That time his brothers sold him to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt as a slave, sold as a slave. But from the pit, he went to the palace. God was with him through it all. He had a good job with Potiphar. And Potiphar wife who tried to trick David couldn't get, Jacob couldn't trick Joseph, sorry. And Joseph ran from her presence. Because of that, he was thrown into prison. And even in prison, God promoted him. Because the keeper of the prison put him above the other prison, in charge of them. He was promoted in prison and out of prison. Because the time came after he had revealed or he had explained the dreams to two other prisoners. After 2 years, one of the prisoners remembered, Pharaoh needs somebody to interpret his dream, and nobody could do it. Maybe Joseph would be able to do it. And he came, interpret that dream. And God was in it all. And Joseph was placed second in command in the entire nation of Egypt. Why was God doing all of that? God had a plan. What was his plan? Preservation of Israel. Israel was Jacob. They came eventually into Egypt, landed in Goshen because of the famine. And there they multiplied. For over 400 years they lived in Egypt, to the point where the Egyptians were scared. There were so many Israelites that they were afraid that if somebody was to come and invade Egypt and the Israelites decided to join with them, they could be overthrown. And what they did, they brought them into slavery, kept them there. And they cried out to God. And after 400 years being there, God answered. God answered. And although God answered their prayers, because of the stubbornness of their hearts, and because also of their lack of faith, and basically, I should say, not lack of faith, but lack of being thankful to God for what God has done. They've been crying out for deliverance. When God did deliver them, it didn't take long before they start complaining to God and to Moses. God has his timing. It was because of the lack of realization on their part that they all end up dying in the wilderness. Only Joshua and Caleb went into the promised land. I'm saying all of that, beloved, just to say that may God help us that we would learn to wait. It's not an easy game. And I tell you, Satan is going to ride you like I don't know what during that time. But we've got to stay focused. Focus. God is never late. And he's never early too. His time is perfect. His time is the right time. And I'm going to close with this. While we are waiting on God's timing, God is preparing us. He's preparing us. And he's preparing us for what he's going to do at the right time. Even Jesus himself said, my time has not yet come. Even he himself said, in the fullness of time. Even he himself said, I do nothing, I say nothing of myself, except that which the Father tells me. Which means, whatever he says, whatever he does, it's the right time. I don't know about you, but there's a time to be born, and there's a time to die. How are you living between that time? How? What are you doing with that time that between your birth and your death? We don't know when we're going to die. We don't even know when the Lord is going to come. One thing we know is that when he comes, the dead in Christ will rise first, then those who are alive and remain will be caught up together to be with him in the air. But if we should die, how have we spent our time between then and death? When the Lord comes, will he find us watching? Watching. Will he find us waiting in expectation? He said, occupy until I come. What are you spending your life building? What are you spending your life doing? I'm going to say it again, and you're tired of me saying this. Christians are not ordinary people. God has created his church. He has created his bride to be Christ-like. It is the will of God that we be conformed into the image and likeness of his Son. There's a chorus that says, let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. All his wondrous compassion and purity. O thou Spirit divine, all my nature refine till the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. Let's pray. Father, thank you this morning for reminding us that you are a God of time. We are a stubborn people. We don't know what it is to learn to wait. We are asking you this morning that you would help us. Help us to look to you and to see how everything that you did was at the right time. Help us to understand that everything you want to do in our lives will be at the right time. And we know that when that time comes, it's full to the overflow with your blessings. Undertake for us, open our understanding, enlighten us, and help us, give us that willing spirit, that spirit of surrender to yield to your will. We ask these things as we give you thanks in Jesus' precious name. Amen.